So you guys realize that Russia has lost, right? No matter what happens against Ukraine with their big summer offensive, even if they take all kinds of Ukrainian territory, they have lost on a strategic geopolitical level, and they have lost massively to the point where I don't believe there's really any hope of recovery under Vladimir Putin. Like it's stunning how much they've lost over the past 40 years. 5 years, 2 years, it's a mess. And we spent an hour talking about this a couple weeks back. Crucially, we recorded this conversation before the June 1st attacks. The Ukrainians carried out a stunning offensive against strategic bombers all over Russia, deep into Russian territory. And of course, accounts vary about what exactly happened, but it's sure that they took out a chunk of Russia's strategic bomber capacity, really expensive planes that don't get built anymore, with a bunch of cheap drones. Now, I'm nowhere near as much of a fan of this as most people on our Discord server are. I find the idea of the nuclear capacity of one of the biggest nuclear powers on the planet getting taken out like this very nerve-wracking, and sort of made me wonder, like, what is Russia's response going to be? I maintain that, even though Russia's response seems to have been very limited. They are carrying out horrific terror bombing on Ukrainian cities, perhaps at a higher level, but they were doing that already. And it just serves to underline that Russia has lost massively on every level. And that is what we spent an hour talking about a couple weeks back, and I hope that you find this conversation interesting.
I think Russia and Ukraine at this point are the two most experienced militaries on the planet. I think that any Ukrainian officer could, spend a lifetime teaching any American officer.
Hello and welcome to the More Freedom Foundation podcast. I'm Murray, in charge of podcasting, and in charge of politics is Robert Morris. How are you this time?
Not bad, not bad. I'm feeling so much more secure now that I know that Donald Trump is pursuing a golden dome.
How similar is this to Star Wars?
This is Star Wars, right?
Oh, he just dusted off. How much has he stolen from Reagan? Because the slogan's Reagan's, and a lot of his policies are, and now just Star Wars.
Yeah, it is. Star Wars, I think, was a pejorative that was applied to. I don't think Reagan ever used the term Star Wars, though perhaps he adopted. He got to like it as time went on. But this is the great, ever receding goal of missile defense, which the United States, by some estimates, has poured $500 billion into since the 1980s. Though I think I saw an exchange that suggested that it's a lot higher than that.
Wow.
Actually, it's probably trillions of dollars. And most of the tests, because there's been a lot of tests, are famously kind of rigged. Like, they sort of make it easier for the missiles to hit missiles.
Okay.
And it just doesn't generally work. I think people get a little confused by the example of the Iron Dome, which is a phenomenally expensive. I don't think there's any chance of Israel being able to do it by itself if it wasn't U.S. subsidized. A phenomenally expensive system that is used over a very small footprint of land.
What is it about? Gaza's about half the size of Manhattan, roughly, something like that.
Yeah, Gaza's half the size of Manhattan, and I assume that, all of Israel, West Bank, Gaza, Palestine is probably smaller than is it smaller than Rhode Island, or is certainly smaller than New Jersey? What's that?
Oh yeah, because there are lots of little islands now at this point, so it's not like a big block.
Yeah, so it's it is a vastly expensive system on over a tiny amount of land that exclusively blocks jury-rigged missiles that are disassembled and reassembled after they've been smuggled.
Very dumb missiles that wouldn't look out of place in World War II, for instance.
Yes, after they've been smuggled out of tunnels. We've actually seen the Iron Dome fail against slightly more sophisticated missiles from one of the poorest countries on the planet, Yemen.
I think an early issue was it was sort of blowing up sort of the middle of the missile. So then the missile, warhead would just sort of ooh, and then fall in. So it has to learn to shoot in front of the missile and stuff. But
oh, interesting.
But yeah, this is if any other country were to fight Israel, it would do it very differently, but yeah, force something the size of America to
Yeah,
implement a policy like this.
for something the size of America that would be plausibly used. And now, if we make the choice to start escalating our already military fight against cartels in Mexico, then gosh, I don't know, maybe we do need some kind of Iron Dome because, but honestly, I expect the Mexican cartels to be better armed than Hamas. And a Golden Dome that actually functioned, a true like Star Wars system, would need to be blocking missiles from Russia and China. And my understanding is that there's been no unrigged test that has ever shown that to be a possibility. So yeah, it's pouring a ton of good money after bad.
But it's good you took away all that money from those silly renewables.
Yeah, I know, right? So Donald Trump loves the idea that he's a peacemaker, loves that he's some kind of a warrior against the deep state military-industrial complex, and to see him adopt the deep statist, most military-industrial complex-est of policies is not particularly surprising. It's vaguely disappointing, but not at all surprising.
But will it stop Russia? That's the true question.
Oh, yeah, it's true. The Russian colossus that's coming for us all. That I did kind of want to. We made a video podcast a number of months back talking about how Ukraine has won. And I stand by that. And I think that recent news has sort of backed up my prediction that a Trump presidency was not going to be anywhere near as disastrous for Ukrainian prospects as folks had I don't know, hoped or dreamed or dreaded or what have you. But I just want to look at like the flip side of that. Let's take an episode to talk about just how screwed Russia is, like the extent to which Russia has lost. Because we love alarmism in the US media more broadly, and we really love alarmism in the foreign policy adjacent discussions. We focus on every 200 yards that Russia manages to take in Donetsk as if it is the end of everything, as if it's
I
some
think at
vast.
this rate it would take like 100 years for them to take all of Ukraine, because it is, if you see like a bar chart of like gains per month, it's obviously a lot early on, and then now it's like, it's hard to comprehend how small it is.
Well, it's going to continue diminishing. I mean, at this point, it'll take them 100 years to get the outskirts of Kyiv. If you do the
Oh
if
yeah,
you
yeah.
do the derivative of that. I don't know math, but it seems to be approaching a limit here. But like, I'd say for the sake of argument, like people are beginning to get worried, are beginning to dread the idea of the Russian a Russian summer offensive. Folks are really beginning to
The
talk about
fighting
this. And
season.
yeah, it's clear that from the prospects of recruitment and morale, Ukraine may be suffering a bit. And if Russia really throws a ton of resources, then maybe they're going to go from taking inches a month to feet a month or something along those lines. But like,
I disagree with that. I think they'd be taking meters, Rob.
excuse me, you're right. that it is your continent. I apologize. But let's say for the sake of argument that Russia actually, like, the Ukrainian military collapses, Russia meets its war aims as currently stated. Russia is still screwed. Like in a broader like geopolitical sense, historical sense, like the amount that Russia has lost certainly over the past 4 years, but over the past 4 decades, is just incomprehensible.
Well, the most tangible is manpower, as in how many, because from what I understand, Russia was a hard place to live in. It had what is that drug, crocodilia?
Oh, crocodile, yes.
It was like a weird synthesized heroin. It looks
like
horrendous. It melts your skin. Life was hard for men in Russia. And this was before the war, and it's just minced them up now. So you have this weird thing. So it's just the fact that it's just hard to do stuff that was traditionally a male job, because a lot of them it seems to be about half of them have, is it 6 million have
I'm
fled?
sure I don't know the data, but that doesn't
So
surprise
there's just
me,
a huge shortage. So if you're already low on men, It's the figure I hear bandied about is close to 1 million casualties. So that includes maybe around 200,000 dead, and then the rest wounded. I just remember saying, sorry to go into grisly details, but
No.
it's just a very small story of this huge wider war. It was like a bomb
Mm-hmm.
disposal guy, and he was like showing like the perimeter what to do. And
Mm-hmm.
as you can imagine, when he went to dispose it, it blew up. And then I caught another. This was a Russian soldier. Then when I caught another one, it was basically someone's like, "What's he?" He was in like a trailer from a quad, and the guy's like, "What's he saying?" And it's basically, it was like, no ears, no eyes, no
Mm-hmm.
legs,
Mm-hmm.
no arms. And how
Mm-hmm.
many men are like that in Russia that
Yep.
are now just going to
Yep.
have to be supported? It's just a horrific. So that's an extreme case, but that's what 800,000 men like that.
The instant counter argument would be that Ukraine has been similarly debilitated, similar struggles. There's only 37 million
Yeah.
Ukrainians and versus 143 Russians, but Ukraine is backed by the United States and all of Europe, and Europe is getting a lot more serious about providing that backing. And the United States has never been that serious about providing the backing. And this is crucial, since I think it was at the 2023 spring offensive that was such a wet fart for the Ukrainians. Nobody in the US or Europe is trying to tell the Ukrainians they have to go on offense anymore.
No.
For Russia to get anywhere near meeting any of its war aims or getting to a place where they'd be able to win at the negotiating table, they just have to keep grinding lives.
Mm-hmm.
And after the very real missteps that the U.S. and European military-industrial complexes have experienced over the past 3 years, forcing Ukraine into offenses it couldn't handle, all of our support right now is defensive and is geared towards grinding up the already ground down Russian military. So there's just
But it's also both sides are incredibly dug in at this point, and they're now
exactly.
they're both experts at defending
Mhm.
and digging in.
Exactly. Exactly. And all the Ukrainians have to do is keep staying dug in. And the Russians need forward progress to justify the level of expenditure. Like Ukraine is not, I mean, Ukraine absolutely is a country, it is a polity, is an economy, but it is entirely supported by massively larger.
But it's still definitely, a terrifying concept to fight on its own. It was definitely like disproportionately where a lot of the Soviet Union's military expertise was, just because of its location. So it definitely had quite a sizable on its own. But yeah, plus all of this Western help on top of that, it's also the fact, sort of from Russia's perspective, the Russian stuff just seems to get worse or more streamlined to be produced on a large scale. But every now and again, Ukraine just gets a random new toy that can, reach further in and destroy further airports into Russia. Like, it just seems to get harder and harder for Russia. Hi, Recording Ruri here. Rob just thinks I should get the Predicting the Future award, as we recorded this episode on May the 29th. And then on June the 1st, Ukraine launched Operation Spiderweb, where it took out billions worth of airplanes deep within Russia. So there's that. Ciao, ciao. But no, the episode's not over. It's just you get what I mean.
Well, I actually don't dispute that. I think Russia and Ukraine at this point are the two most experienced
Oh, yeah.
militaries on the planet. I think that any Ukrainian officer could run rings around and teach, spend a lifetime teaching any American
Because I remember a
officer.
big part, there's the YouTuber Lindy Beige. He was interviewing a British man who had been part of the Ukrainian army, and he was just saying a big part of it is your resolve under artillery. Because he was saying, yeah, there's some, I'm certain there's some men or American soldiers that are covered in highly decorated that would be terrified when they are certain that, artillery is only a couple of 100 meters away. When he says you might have people that are completely green and they can just cope with it. And that's a skill set very few people have. But now the Ukrainians are like, I've just lived in this trench for a year now. I have nerves of steel.
Yeah, the U.S. military doesn't know how to get,
because I remember hearing a lot from, is it What a Wonderful Way to Die? They said that when they were in like Afghanistan, a lot of what gave them their bravery was knowing, oh, I can get a medivac anytime I can. I have incredible air support, and they don't have planes. When in when you're fighting there, it's very toe to toe,
Yeah,
and you're not getting medevaced.
Russia and Ukraine are fighting something much more akin to a fair fight, and horrifically, they appear to be developing whole new technologies. I don't know if you saw that footage recently of there was, I can't remember, it was a Russian or Ukrainian soldier sort of walking through some of the contested areas, and apparently everything is covered with like fiber
Yeah,
optic strands now because you had the
can't be
drones that were
hacked.
really effective, and then people figured out how to jam the drones, and there was like, and now they have wires connecting the drones that are, I guess, miles long.
They can
So
be. So yeah, fiber optic technology must have gotten incredibly cheap. Like nearly all of rural Northern Ireland has fiber optic broadband. So it would suggest that this technology is plummeted. And yeah, apparently it can be a bit dangerous for the operators because it says it's like spooky spider web, like because there's just like tens or hundreds of just like the fiber optic lines coming out from one area. But if you ever see
Mhm.
drone footage and it's crystal clear, that is. So I seen them using it to like just go really slow inside like a shed and then try to go inside a tank that was parked in a shed. So yeah, it's another terrifying development. And yeah, Ukraine are now the masters of drones, which are, a lot
Well,
of them were like,
Ukraine and Russia, I think,
oh yeah,
is the
yeah,
key
yeah.
thing.
But
Like
it
they are
seems to be
both learning.
Ukraine's,
Yeah.
developing faster. But yeah, they're both.
And it's, I think one of just to, like, guys, I think this is worth signposting because it's a horrific thing, and just an indication of how much humanity is losing here, is that like every war has its sort of aesthetic, like if you say maybe perhaps this is of my generation, but if you say Vietnam, like, there's Creedence Clearwater Revival in the background, classic rock songs. There's, the guys with the cigarettes and the jungle warfare outfits, and there's helicopters coming through. And what I think what's so horrifying about this is that, we had an aesthetic of what trench warfare was
Hmm.
from World War One. That's
Yeah.
what World War One was. And now it's like there's just the idea of like World War One, but everything's draped in fiber optic threads, like this spider stuff, the remnants of drone technology or whatnot. And we are updating, we have a new aesthetic of war, which means that we have a whole new horrifying range of technologies that are going to be applied everywhere. And it is the Russians and the Ukrainians that are for generations now are going to be at the leading edge of applying that from Africa to whatever new war zones develop anywhere
Well, the
else.
other terrifying thing is a
Mhm.
lot of, theoretically, terrorist organizations now have what a small air force could provide.
Mhm. Yeah,
Because I think a
sure.
lot of, was it Myanmar is where you would have seen a lot
Mhm.
of drone warfare before this war. So yeah, it's here to stay. Like, sorry, this is just something. I remember I recently heard like a drone nearby, and my first thought was panic because I'm just so
Mhm.
associated with drones killing Russians
Mhm.
and being
Yeah,
attached with high explosives.
drones are scary. You should be. I mean, it's just not nice. Like I can't remember where I was, what environment I was in. I was at a beach or something, and there was just a drone there, just sort of hovering. I'm like, "What is this?" Like, who? I mean, it was somebody's recreational drone for sure, but it's just like, why am I just okay with there's a thing with a camera just sort of floating there around our party? Like, how is that acceptable now? But it is what's acceptable now. So the minutia of what's going on, I dived in a little bit this morning, and it's hard to resist the idea that it's what's going on is not much. Certainly, Russia has vastly more, on the ground resources and manpower than Ukraine does. So possibly its summer offensive will be a big deal. But I tend to believe that their summer offensive will be, as has every offensive since 2022 in this war, be a just incredibly costly disappointment. And this is on top of a series of costly disappointments. Russia has lost so much over the past 40 years. I think what gets forgotten a little bit in this idea that Russia is somehow encroaching on Europe, and the laughable idea that you'll hear probably weekly in testimony to the U.S. Congress that the world is more dangerous than it's ever been, Russia is surging, is that we are fighting this proxy war over the industrial heartland of the Soviet Union. Like
Hmm.
Ukraine, I glory in Ukrainian independence and I am proud of them and happy for them. But when I was born, this was the Soviet Union. This was the Russian heartland. And like any, it seems like every other cover of Foreign Affairs magazine is talking about what's Putin doing? Putin's coming. Russia's, new war against the. And it's just like, we're fighting over the pieces of Russia's empire. Like, it's just, if they get everything they want, Crimea is now Russian, I think, in my mind. But like, if they get Crimea, Luhansk, Donetsk, Zaporizhia, and Kherson, they get all of it. They haven't even made it to Odessa. They haven't made it to Kyiv. And like, if they were to successfully pull this off, we get a demilitarized zone that will last for generations, again, through the heartland of the Soviet Union, of the old Tsarist Empire. Like, it's just, even victory beyond anything that is being conceived in like the worst nightmares of Brussels is still a massive loss for Russia. And I think that that detail is being
And I've
is
also heard the
being
fact sort of he kind of needs this big man thing, and being in this war makes it seem like he's one of the greatest leaders on earth. While if it ends, he's kind of just in charge of a relatively poor country that's the GDP of Spain, when everything should have it being at least 4 times the GDP of Spain when you consider its population and size and resources.
much has been made, and I think accurately, of like, oh, wait, these sanctions haven't done what we wanted them to do. Like these, we expected Russia to be brought to its knees. And like, in the short term, these things have not been as effective as we might have hoped. But in the long term, like, it is catastrophic.
Oh yeah, yeah.
Like, Donald Trump talked a big game about stopping the fighting with Russia,
Hmm.
but like, Russia can't stop fighting because that's all they have. Like, if Putin were to grant a ceasefire, do you think there'd be any pressure at all for the lifting of sanctions? No, what
Yeah.
Putin needs.
What's that brand new one that's like, I doubt it'll go through, but any country like trading with Russia is going to get hit with a 400% like tariff from America?
Yeah, that's an absurdity and shouldn't pass anything. But yeah, Lindsey Graham is pushing it's essentially secondary sanctions.
Hmm.
Though I guess actually it's not as bad as secondary sanctions, but that's the idea. Yeah, Lindsey Graham is pushing that idea. And yeah, I don't expect that to go through. But I think the European Union right now is now pushing for a lower price cap on Russian oil. I don't fully understand the minutia of how this works. I know that it is evaded in many places, but the current sanctioning regime against Russian oil was that the Europeans acknowledging that for the benefit of, just basically for the price stability of oil, they've got to allow some Russian oil to be sold to some people, and there's a price cap. But now the price of oil, I think,
Oh yeah, is that low?
is below that price cap. So Europe will lower it. And I think that like, so there's a couple huge barriers to actual peace here. Both of which I think are really bad for Russia. The From the Trump perspective, he's really reliant on oil and gas money as an industry that's probably, well, actually, no, as an industry, whatever industries Elon Musk is in, they're probably the largest donors to his campaign. But the oil companies are a really key part of his coalition. And in order to produce as much as he bragged he wanted to produce, as much as he claimed he wanted to produce, the Russians can't be allowed to sell their oil and gas at normal prices ever again.
And in an environment where it's already pretty low?
Exactly. So if the only way you're going to get Russia to stop fighting is through some kind of deal that allows them to become a normal country again, and that's simply never going to happen, not just because of the war hawks in Brussels and Washington, D.C., but because the oil industry would collapse, like, even further than it already has. So it's just, like, structurally, like, impossible, and I think what Putin knows, and this is sort of the Russian thing, is that when the fighting stops, there is zero incentive for anybody to do anything. So he kind of, for this to be a win for Putin, he has to, like, meet some of his stated goals, which he's not really going to meet. There's not going to be any denazification of Ukraine. Ukraine is not going to join NATO, but Ukraine was never going to join NATO.
Do you think it's significantly more likely to now?
Oh, it's absolutely not. It's never going to join NATO.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. But yeah. I mean, yeah. I don't know. I mean, never is a strong term. I don't know what.
But when we're talking about Russian fields, we have two of Europe's best armies have now joined NATO.
Oh, what, Finland and
Yeah, because Finland had a massive,
Sweden?
like, they're very, their citizens are very well trained. They all seem to have a very good knowledge of artillery, a massive recruitment base. And Sweden has, incredible engineering when it comes to naval, submarines and air force.
Yeah, I don't think that really matters because I've never thought that Russia was going to attack a NATO country. Like, because I just don't.
Oh yeah, but it
Mhm.
was, Finland was neutral and on its border,
Sure.
and now it'll never be invaded.
Well, yeah, I don't think it was. I don't think. Well, Finland was already pretty heavily armed up.
Oh yeah,
But the
Finland made sure they weren't being invaded.
well, so that's interesting. The way that there's been a lot of reporting recently about Putin's sinister moves on the Finnish border.
Yes.
And I'm like, you recall that Finland joined a massive military organization that is dedicated to Russia's destruction, right? So it's not I'm not saying it's a good thing that Putin's building up, but it's not like this is a out of nowhere thing, that Russia is building up forces. In fact, it's just what Finland's NATO accession was supposed to do, which is divide and divert Russia's military focus on Ukraine. And it was a good thing it's happening, I guess. It's not like some sinister, crazy plot by Putin. It is oh God, I'm an idiot and I have created a further encirclement of myself. I guess I better put some troops there. Because, I mean, Finland is what? Like, Finland is a lot closer to Moscow than Kyiv is, right? Like,
Yeah.
yes. Like, it's or I mean, St. Petersburg is like in like the Finnish suburbs, right? Like, yeah. So yeah, obviously. So I think Putin made some extraordinarily poor calculations. He thought that Europe would just sort of knuckle under. He thought he was stronger than he was. Hey, Rory, do you like the More Freedom Foundation?
I do.
Would you like us to keep being able to do the More Freedom Foundation?
That's something I think is a wonderful idea. Could you please tell me more?
The way to do that would be to sign up for Patreon. Patreon is a crowdfunding service, kind of like Kickstarter, except it allows you to send us a certain amount of money every month.
Are there any benefits I get if I sign up to Patreon?
There is a Discord server, which is just for Patreon members. Folks love it over there. We got a lot of really smart folks talking about the news of the day. I find it really useful for my research sometimes. So we've got that Discord server, and we've got not one, but two patrons-only events every month. We've got the patrons-only newscast, where patrons suggest stuff that I should look into, and I provide sort of a capsule update for the month. And then we have, on the Discord server, we have a chat with me and the patrons.
So if you have ever wanted to be in my position asking Rob questions, then there's your chance.
There you go. Yeah. So that is available only to people who sign up on Patreon. I hope you'll join us there.
Well, yeah, I heard the problem with a lot of Russian corruption. Well, it's just horrendous all round. A lot of people in, I know, just to compare it to America, anytime you see photographs of, like, an American warehouse, it kind of looks like a nice enough place to work. It looks like, oh, I can progress here. This seems a nice enough job. While in Russia, it just seems to be like a horrible hole in the middle of nowhere with an old man, and he will just swap you stuff if you give him enough vodka. If you want a couple of hand grenades, apparently, is quite common. And they would just lie because no one's going to check it. And
That seems a little on the nose stereotypical.
So it meant that, like, on paper...
Where is this from?
Well, I've heard multiple sources. I know Laserpig he talked about an ex-boyfriend of his. That's what they did once. he went to the place and just says, "Here's a load of drink," and he says, "Right, do you want to play with some hand grenades?" So
Well, I mean, there are famous stories about, Elon Musk before he founded SpaceX. He went to Russia and to try and buy a rocket, and they all just sort of laughed at him and got drunk.
yeah, rocket is a bit different. It's a bit like a nuclear sub.
But I mean, like, well, I don't want to.
But I think just on paper, he was like, "Oh, I have all this," and then in reality, it was like, "Oh, I don't." But also, apparently, a lot of you heard about the soldiers selling the fuel because they didn't think they'd be invading, and a lot of Americans were like, the only amount of like foot soldier corruption they're aware of was the whole like sneaking rugs back from like Afghanistan and Iraq. So it was like low level
I think
corruption.
I want to push back a little bit. I
Okay.
think that there is no question in my mind that Russia is an obscenely corrupt place where I'm sure that exactly that laser pig anecdote took place. But also it has effectively, I remember a lot of talk from the fall of 2022 when Ukraine was like winning those amazing victories. It was like, and Russia did this mobilization and there was like, well, 45 guys like got bussed to a frozen lake and they all died and ha 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 ha, these Russians can't do anything. Russia's a very large place. We talk about much larger places on this channel, but like 143 million people, mobilization of hundreds of thousands of troops, insane, like stereotypical, anecdotal stuff that goes far beyond the anecdote you told is happening every day in Russia, I'm sure. However, at the same time, there are competent people who are keeping up with the Ukrainians and occasionally innovating above the Ukrainians, and the Ukrainians have to innovate above them.
Oh
And
yeah, quite often in war, a lot of the fat
yeah,
gets killed off. So yeah, both sides are now just incredibly professional and deadly, and just brilliant at their jobs. That'll be studied for decades to come.
they are much leaner, harder.
Because another thing with that anecdote with the British soldier that's in the Ukrainian army, well, he used to be a British soldier, was basically it goes there. They were talking about how, as you say, there are anecdotes about how incompetent the Russians are, and he says, "Oh no, if the Russian artillery wants to hit you, they'll hit you." Like, because he's talking about, do you remember the whole Donbass separatists and stuff? He goes, they were terrible.
Mm-hmm.
When they couldn't hit a barn door, but he goes, as soon as when they realized the Russians were in charge, it was like, oh, they could destroy things brilliantly. So, oh yeah, they are terrifying, and both sides are on top of their game.
Yeah, it is a terrifying conflict, but I think what's becoming more and more apparent, I think even to Vladimir Putin, is that this reconstituted Russian military force is all they have. And much has been made of like, oh, there's this new axis of like, oh, they've got this North Korean ally who apparently was very happy to jump into the war and has now jumped out. More or less is my understanding where that stands currently. They got North Korea, they've got Iran, and they've got
A handful of
China
Chinese
that's too
soldiers.
embarrassed to actually support them in any big way and doesn't really want to build that infrastructure to
Well, yeah, and then the
replace
big
European gas demand.
yeah,
Like, yeah.
and then the big
Mhm.
theory is China. There's parts of is it Manchuria that Russia currently own that China might like back. I know this is a big stretch, but maybe they're just waiting for Russia to collapse and they might expand China.
Well, but I think that, yeah, I mean, I've been talking about the Amur River region. The Amur River region, I think, was taken by Russia from China after the British took Hong Kong. So,
No, I heard people, how Putin likes to talk about history
hmm
revisionism, and it's like, oh,
hmm
Russia used to own this, and it's a bit like, well,
hmm
if you're going to play that game, China used to
yeah,
own that.
yeah, yeah. But I think that people, and I think I'm guilty of this actually, is like because I am have throughout this conflict, I have been far more worried about a Russian collapse than I have been about a Ukrainian loss. Because if Russia, the largest or second largest nuclear weapons power on the planet, were to actually collapse, you've got, every basically every criminal organization on the planet becomes a nuclear
And
power.
it'll be kind of the fall of the Soviet Union over again.
And also, it's like a collapse of. We've seen collapses of countries, Syria, Yemen to a degree, Libya, And these are horrifying things with refugee flows and crimes against humanity. And the biggest of those countries is Yemen at 30 million. And that didn't even really collapse to the extent that Yemen or Syria did. Like, it's just really bad thing. And I think probably the scariest thing that has happened, scarier than COVID in the 2020s, Prigozhin sort of chickening out, thankfully, but the guy was going to do like a march on Moscow. I mean, that is probably the scariest thing of the 2020s. Can you imagine any result from that? Like, oh, okay, so this deranged mercenary chief in charge of Russia's nuclear arsenal getting dispersed to a bunch of breakdown mini republics, Russia's nuclear arsenal getting, so yeah, I'm less worried about that now. I feel like Putin has consolidated power. I feel like the Russian military machine can rather quickly turn around to defend itself in the event of another coup. Perhaps Prigozhin's coup demonstrated that to some extent. It's not so much Russian disintegration that I'm worried about so much at this point. It's just the fact that, like, that entire area of the world is going to probably be in this sort of either fully state of full warfare or in sort of a semi-demilitarized mess for generations to come. And I think that when we do get to a ceasefire, which I do believe is inevitable, whether it takes 3 months or another 3 years, Ukraine is absolutely going to be able to advance. Ukraine is going to be repopulated. Ukraine is going to get a ton of European funding to build up its military, to build up its society.
And a lot of American money as well with this minerals deal.
Yeah, I don't know about that minerals deal,
Okay.
but yeah, I mean, I know it exists, but no, but there's a lot of pejorative ways to say that the United States military has successfully set up a new South Korea in the middle of the Soviet Union, but there's positive aspects to that as well. I believe that once the ceasefire finally happens, which I expect in the next 5 years, Ukraine will be sort of force developed.
Oh yeah. The future is very bright for Ukraine.
And the future couldn't be more dismal for Russia.
Because if you look at somewhere like Poland, like their economy has basically, doubled since joining the European Union. And I think their minimum wage is now higher than America.
Yeah.
So, but I think the big issue is it seems to be a lot of talk now that Russia's economy is kind of maxed out in war context. So it seems like when you sort of switch into war mode, that boosts the economy. So everybody's suddenly getting contracts. You could have companies that were kind of not doing great. Suddenly it's like, what can you do? Give us it all. We need it now. So, but that's now done. The country is now completely, fully warred. And I heard there's like another like flip side to war, which is it can look really good when it's not. So I'm going to use Spain as an example. People were complaining that they were building too many trains. So let's say they're building too many trains and they don't need it, but people are still going to use those trains. They're still going to help the economy. They're going to help people go to work. They're going to help people, enjoy their lives. So for 20 years, that train that maybe was made in Italy but got specialists done in Spain, it's got a circular economy going. But if you make a tank for a war, great, it makes some jobs. It goes to the front lines, and after a month or two, it explodes.
Yeah.
It's not doing anything after that. It's a sort of real money hole.
Yeah, and I think that's that short-term, long-term thing we were talking about earlier, is that in the short term, Russia has proven to be a lot more durable than a lot of sort of overconfident American and European analysts were expecting.
Because I think the big thing was that interest rates went sky high at the start of the war to try to keep the money in, because people were like, oh, our money's worth more if we keep it here because the interest rates are going up.
Man, you may understand interest rates and debt securities, Rory, but I sure don't. So I do understand that inflation is becoming a bigger and bigger problem. The value of the ruble initially spiked after the invasion, which surprised a lot of people. It's now sort of vacillating back and forth, but at a much lower level than it was in 2022. It's Russia can continue probably for much longer than any of us would like as this sort of garrison economy, this sort of blinkered war-oriented place, but it's just going to get less and less happy. It's going to get it's interesting that sort of Iran and North Korea have seemed to be really eagerly embracing Russia on a lot of levels because they're both like phenomenally isolated places. China's eye towards Russia is superficially supportive on some
Well,
levels.
yeah, because there's always this, what is it, coalition of super friendship or something
No
ridiculous.
limits cooperation.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that was no limits cooperation was what Xi Jinping was offering in January of 2022, before the war started. Now it's kind of like, China wanted a no limits cooperation
Mm-hmm.
with a powerful Russia
Yeah.
with deep links and entree into Europe, a flourishing petroleum economy at the cutting edge of everything that perhaps could help China with things. Russia isn't that anymore.
But also, I remember seeing there was like a handful of Chinese troops were in, on the front lines. I think these were ones that were, uh, they're being, sort of not quite interviewed, but they were talking and they were a bit like, we thought the Russians were incredible super soldiers. And now we see them and they're like, it's all a bit disappointing.
Well, I think Russia, I think China already has a North Korea.
Mm-hmm.
Like they don't want another. Like
Yeah.
this is not the Russia Putin was selling them. Like they wanted the cosmopolitan petro wizard keeping Europe sort of from fully falling into the American
Mm-hmm.
camp. Now, yeah, it's just another North Korea. The way that Russia acts now is to push Europe towards the United States. That is not what China wanted.
Yeah. Because I've heard like despite what's happening with, America, the way America's treating Ukraine, they still like America a lot more than Russia.
Yeah. Well, and just China may or may not, depending on how poorly Trump continues to manage things, like be interested in a friendly relationship with the United States anymore. To what extent? I mean, it's a very open question. But they desperately want, especially if competition goes into a new level with the United States, they desperately want to appeal to
Mm-hmm.
Europe.
Yeah.
Desperately for trade deals, for geopolitical things. And up until 2022, I mean, arguably less so after 2014, but up until 2022, China could still use Russia as a partner in trying to carve Europe away from the United States. And now Russia is nothing but a menace to Europe. And every ounce of support that China publicly or even surreptitiously gives to Russia is another way to lose out in Europe. And it's become clear that perhaps the fact that Europe has a vastly larger GDP than Russia doesn't have as much military weight initially as we'd hoped. But hoo boy, does that have a lot of weight for China. Europe is, taken collectively, is the second largest market for all of China's goods. And Russia is a place where they could buy marginally more expensive oil and gas goods that they can get for cheaper without any legal.
Yeah. Ramifications.
And if they want black market, super cheap oil, they've got Iran for that, So it's like Russia basically, and this is a really key, like, part of this whole, new access between Russia and China, like stuff that I don't think they're fully fleshing out or thinking about in US and European foreign policy is that Russia has transformed itself into something that is infinitely less useful to China. They have transformed themselves into another North Korea. And I think people wonder why. There are many reasons why we don't hear much about BRICS. I mean, you'd think with Donald Trump,
I've heard talk that it's basically dead.
that's not particularly surprising. I mean, Donald Trump is basically,
Oh yeah, he could make it something.
what BRICS is designed. Yeah, is designed to oppose. And there's nothing. There's nothing
Mhm.
here. Because
But also the other major thing is the brain drain. Like a hell of a lot. Was it something like 6 million left? And a crazy number have left Russia. A lot going to like Georgia and stuff. So if you're most desperate, intelligent, and rich people, they're probably left by now. But at least oil prices are high because that's something that Russia can rely on.
Right. Rory, I regret to inform you that oil prices are not, in fact, high.
Oh.
In fact, if you
Oh yeah, consider the inflationary effects of the dollar and stuff.
yeah. If you consider the fact also, like, that the dollar, since Liberation Day has been plummeting, and the oil
Yeah.
price denominated in dollars has not been going up. So even before Liberation Day, prices were at historic lows.
$64 a barrel currently.
Yeah. Yeah. So, and very close to falling into the 50s,
Mm-hmm.
which, and then you consider inflation, then you consider how weak the dollar is, specifically, in this period of
Mm-hmm.
time. And yeah, I mean, it is nightmarish. One figure I did find is that in 2025, the Russian government expects 25% lower oil and gas revenue
This year?
this year. And it's not like 2024 was that great either.
Because the big year was right at the start of the war. It shot up to nearly $120 a barrel.
Yeah.
And then it's gone down ever since.
Yep.
So yeah, it was nearly like close to 90 at a point in 2024. And yeah, now we're hitting 60.
Yeah. Well, the key thing about that huge spike is because of inflation, like the $120 a dollar of oil, OMG. But it had been so long that since, we'd gotten anywhere close to that, that if you factor in inflation, like, it was really only, that massive spike was really only to the prices that were normal before 2014. Yeah. So there was just this brief moment. So, and oil and gas, it's just not going to get more expensive again. I mean, a lot of things could happen in the United States. Basically, the only thing in the near term that could make oil and gas prices be high again and sort of save the Russian war effort would be a U.S. war with Iran that knocks out not just Iranian production, but also most Gulf production. So that's the 30%, I think, or thereabouts, of world oil and gas production happens in the Persian Gulf. A U.S.-Iran war could shut that down. If that happens,
Is that on your bingo card for this year?
it's falling further and further away from my bingo card. One of the great dynamics, one of the very few amusing dynamics of the early second Trump administration is the extent to which classic neocon Republicans have just been absolutely losing their minds. Because a lot of their historic allies, Tucker Carlson, Steve Bannon, Donald Trump Jr.,
Wow.
Charlie Kirk, these are all names that I am very used to hating and on most topics am no fan of, but have all come out heavily against Iran war. So a lot of the historic neocons have moved over to the Democratic coalition just because they've always been sort of pro-war, and the Democrats were, I mean, this has been a dynamic since the first Trump administration, but there are a lot of folks like, Ben Shapiro, some other folks who have stayed with the Republican brand, with the Trumpian brand, in the hopes of, it's now clear, in the hopes of fomenting war with Iran. And they're really losing hope, and they are panicking, and they're sort of picking fights with their traditional allies, and they're just generally losing their cool. Which is kind of fun to watch. So yeah, I mean, at any moment, a U.S.-Iran war is very possible. There are tons of people in the U.S. and Iranian hierarchies who are looking for excuses to get it started. More obviously in the U.S. and Israeli hierarchies than there are in the Iranian hierarchies, but Iran has idiotic hardliners as well. So the risk is always there, but I'm getting a little more confident that it's not going to happen. So
At the height of the Cold War, I always was taught that like Americans' military expenditure was about 5%. Would that be right? Something like that?
5% sounds a little high, but maybe.
Okay, I heard at the height of the Cold War it was that, but just to give context, Rob thought that was too high. 8% is what Russia's spending on its current war.
Yeah, oh, that doesn't surprise me at all.
So it is at war, so it does make sense, but it feels like it's kind of maxed out. It's now kind of just running out of money. It's done every trick in the book. The other major thing is the fact that there does seem to be a lot of economic issues worldwide, because it doesn't feel like there's anybody that's like, I don't know, can bail it out or throw money at it. Everyone's a bit like, we kind of need our money at the moment. Do you know what I mean? The vibe in the air is recession, and apparently, according to Goldman Sachs, Russia is in a recession.
Yeah, and it's only likely to get worse. I mean, Russia is, at the end of the day, it's a petrostate.
Yes, it seems to have Dutch disease, but like chronically bad. Like over 50% of it is directly oil, gas.
It's not quite as bad as, say, Saudi Arabia, but it's pretty bad.
Yeah.
And the whole
Saudi Arabia
context,
is not currently at war that it's
yeah,
potentially losing.
yeah, and this whole context of Russia's invasion of Ukraine, which has now lasted well over 3 years, is that the world economy has generally been in pretty good shape. I'm not saying everybody was happy, inflation was biting at a lot of populations and anything, but the economic engines were turning over, companies were profitable, activity was increasing. Most people agree that that's over. And
Yeah.
some degree, whether it's a massive one or just a mild recession, means that Russian ability to sell oil and gas plummets.
Oh yeah, yeah, worldwide, and also the fact China keeps making these horrible things called electric cars that are getting more and more popular. But it's good that you can always trust Donald Trump. He's a very reliable guy. Because my main feeling is like there was a lot of energy Russia was putting into Trump, and it was almost like once Trump's in, we'll get it over the line and we'll get what we want. And now it's almost as if Trump is like perfectly designed to torture and exhaust Russia. Because now
Yeah.
it's like like it's hard to know what Trump's reading now of Russia.
Well, so the Donald Trump has always been rhetorically very friendly
Mm-hmm.
to Vladimir Putin
Yeah.
and Russia. This has never been backed up by policy.
Because that's what I always find shocking. You keep hearing Trump sort of being complimentary to Russia, and then it's like, oh, they're proposing a 400% to anyone that trades with them. It's like, oh, what's going on here?
Well, that's sort of a settled dynamic from the first term. Donald Trump, in his first term, had no control over what the Congress did, had no control over what his own offices were doing. He never, in his first term, had any real control over the executive branch. It was mostly in the hands of people like Mike Pompeo, who were constantly driving Donald Trump towards a more hawkish policy. And because Russia became the excuse for Hillary Clinton's loss to Donald Trump, which seems so inexplicable, the U.S. Congress had sort of a weird alliance between a lot of Democrats who newly were really angry at and hated Russia, and a lot of traditional Republican hawks who were like, yeah, we love Trump, but we're also very happy to completely ignore Trump's nice rhetoric. So we got some really massive sanctions against the Russian defense industry, large-scale arming up of Ukraine. In fact, at least post-2014, Donald Trump's policy was vastly worse than Obama, vastly harder on Russia than Obama's post-2014 policy. I think that Putin could rationally have said to himself, well, that was the first term Trump. The second term Trump is going to have more of his ducks in the line, have more control over what the executive branch does. And I think that's true, actually. I think that worked out for Putin. The extent to which that worked out, I mean, Donald Trump is 78, does appear to be losing more and more of his faculties as days go by. It's very
But it's
familiar.
a race between him and Trump.
Yeah, it's a very, very, very familiar dynamic from the Biden administration, the way that Trump seems to be losing his stuff. But I don't want to overstate the idea that Trump's in control now and has his people there. He's still out of his mind. He's still a terrible manager. But it is a lot more compared to his first term. The second term Trump administration at this point looks like a well-oiled machine. So Putin,
On foreign policy.
yeah, more so on foreign policy than on anything else. Most of his domestic policies, which you actually need Congress for, seem to be a series of executive orders and vandalism that gets overturned by the courts. The president has a lot of control over foreign policy, and what he did in Yemen was phenomenal. What he did in Syria was phenomenal and was against the interests of the military-industrial complex. So Putin perhaps had some basis for hope that Trump would offer him more. But you've got the oil industry dynamic we talked
Mhm.
about earlier, and Putin can't stop fighting until he's
No.
got some kind of agreement about lifting sanctions. or Russia, which I think is what is going to happen eventually under Putin or somebody else, is that Putin is going to get a ceasefire, march out of the stimulus of war production, so that'll be taken out of the equation, and then he still won't be able to sell his oil and gas to anybody if the sanctions don't even get worse.
But is this not also great for dissidents? Because either you're sending them to the front, they have left the country, or you can just imprison them because we're at war and, oh, you're a spy. Like, if things ease off and they all start to come back home, will there not be a hell of a lot of unrest?
Absolutely. So the end of the war means that eventually wartime restrictions have to be lifted to some degree. And yeah, it's all lose, lose, lose for Putin. He probably thought he could get some kind of magical deal out of Donald Trump, but Donald Trump cares a heck of a lot more about his oil industry donors than he does about Vladimir effing Putin. And Trump had a delusional idea of this conflict. He really thought that
But
he
Trump
could just
is in a
sort of,
position of power. He sadly, people's lives are lost when Trump gets things wrong. But for Trump, it's fine. He just gets bored and starts complaining about South Africa, and then gets bored and complains about something else. While it's not quite the same for Vladimir Putin. This is where all his chips are.
This is where all his chips are, and this is where he's stuck. For 2022, I mean, we ran videos about how he was being successful in the Caucasus. He looked like, I was always very, very, very suspicious of this interpretation, but he looked like a kingmaker in Syria and, da-da-da.
That's another thing we forgot about. Syria is gone.
Yeah, just
Assad's
gone.
just a guy that lives in Moscow now.
Yeah, that's gone. Caucasus, he had successfly reoccupied basically Azerbaijan and Armenia. Didn't have the resources to back that up when Azerbaijan wanted to end Nagorno-Karabakh in early 2023, and that's gone now. It's interesting that Russia is such a non-actor in Syria at this point that Israel is advocating that Russia be allowed to keep its military bases in Syria exclusively just to make it harder for the Syrian government, just to make Syria a little more unstable. So that's how little an impact Russia has on this conflict.
Does Russia really care at this point?
Well, Russia definitely wants to keep its only Mediterranean military bases, its only bases on the other side of the Black Sea. Yes, it definitely wants to keep those. And it might actually be able to keep those bases as like a pity gift. Putin staked everything on this Ukraine war, and wow, did he lose. Wow, did he lose. And I think that's the main message, that who knows, this summer offensive by the Russians may turn out to be very, very successful. But even if it is massive, even if they get to the gates of Kharkiv or Kyiv again, it's still an extraordinary loss for Russia.
And, well, yeah, the obvious fact is, when you consider the size of Russia, and you're like, well, if you're not doing well out of a country that large, you're not going to do much better when you've just stolen a bit of Ukraine. So, yeah, the future is looking bleak for Putin, but hopefully the people of Russia, things get a bit better.
It would be nice. It would be nice if in a post-Putin world, which would be nice to see sooner than Putin's
later.
natural life, but I think is unlikely at this point. In a post-Putin world, Russia, I mean, there's still a lot of scopes for opening, a lot of scopes for making peace. I just don't see how Vladimir Putin could possibly do it.
Well, on that depressing note, we shall catch you next time. Ciao, ciao.
Indeed. Thank you, Kenley.
The More Freedom Foundation is also available on YouTube and TikTok. Rob's Twitter is RobOLaw, and he's also written a book called Avoiding the British Empire: What It Was and How the US Can Do Better. And music provided by Kevin MacLeod.